Thanks everyone for joining today. So this meeting is going to be just a little bit different. Emily is on PTO, so instead I've asked Eric to join and Derek, and so from their team, just to give us an overview of what is their Eric, your team's roles and responsibility. We'd love just some insights into, as you think about making the handbook more consumable and usable, like what are some of the things that you're working on, and then hopefully have some time for some Q&A from the team as well. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Awesome. Thanks again for both of you joining today.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. So for those that haven't met me, my name is Eric Schurter, and I'm the product manager for the static site editor group, which is in the create stage, and also the handbook, which is obviously not a marketing category, but our team maintains the handbook from a technical standpoint. And our group was really formed late last year out of the necessity for a better editing experience on the handbook. And it was there's obviously some low-hanging fruit and some really obvious issues with collaborating on the handbook as it is now. And there are products out there, and there are ways that we can make that better, but I think the product leadership and the senior leadership here took a step back and said, well, let's not just fix it for the handbook. Let's see if we can embrace this and build something that's a little more usable for all of our customers, and then dog food it in true GitLab nature. And so our group was formed. We are focused ultimately on delivering a more friendly, more familiar, and more accessible interface for editing content on static sites. And so to define static sites, these are sites that don't call out to databases or have a bunch of API calls that pull in from different services. These are files that are served as static HTML, JavaScript, and CSS that sit on a server that can just run similar to how we have GitLab pages. So the handbook is a great example, and the handbook is our primary source of dog fooding our feature. The handbook is generated through a framework called Middleman, which if you've edited the handbook, you've probably seen Middleman. You've had to start up Middleman maybe. Middleman is a Ruby-based static site generator. And there are dozens, if not maybe 100 other ones out there. Middleman is not the most popular. It is probably the most popular Ruby-based one. And I think the decision to choose Middleman was based on our technical expertise in Ruby back in the day. A static site generator is, to take a step back, is helpful for an engineer who wants to output static sites from a collection of content, and that content would be better served separated from the layout of the page itself. So if you can imagine somebody making a landing page for a product, it's fine to just write the content in line with the page styling, and you just like push out a page and it lives there. But if you take a blog or a documentation portal or a handbook as an example, where you have hundreds, if not thousands, of content pages, if you wanted to change a global style of one of those templates, changing it across 1,000 pages would be impractical. So static site generators take the templating of the page, and then usually somewhere in there, there's just one line that says, find all the Markdown pages that use this template and put their content in this block. And so when the generator starts running on the local development environment on the developer's machine, or in our case on the CI pipeline, when the generator is running, we are going through and looping over every page that's marked as a certain page type, pulling the content into the template and generating an output that's a static HTML file. And so all that to say is there's a big compilation step, and then the output is just a bunch of HTML pages. that you can put on any server, anywhere, and host your site. That's the idea anyway. The problem comes with collaboration on these sites. So that content is somewhat separated from the layout, which is great. You don't need to know a bunch of programming to edit a static site, but you still, at least most of the time, need to understand how the project is structured, how to make changes to a project that might be hosted on a GitLab repository and configured with a continuous integration server or something like that. And often you're writing in Markdown, which is not necessarily the most familiar syntax, as we've discovered countless times, especially when it comes to tables. And it doesn't cover all the bases. So when you have to import things like diagrams or embed YouTube links and things like that, Markdown can get a little messy. So what we're aiming to do, and what we have started to do actually with 12.10, is build a feature that can run on your static site and provide a link to edit the content on that page that is separate from a code editor workflow. So separate from the idea of a web IDE, separate from building it on your local dev environment and checking out the branch and making changes there. Some of the largest, I'd say, sticking points or roadblocks to contributing to the handbook, and this extends beyond the handbook. This is anybody who wants to contribute to a site that's statically hosted or statically generated. Some of the major roadblocks are getting that local dev environment set up, because that is the easiest way to contribute. If you have that and you have the knowledge of Git and you can use the terminal and you know how to check out a branch, it's quite straightforward to make changes to these projects. But that's a lot of overhead. And even for the smallest changes, it feels like you're spending more time typing Git commands than you are making content edits. So we want to abstract that away, and we want to provide editing tools that are more familiar, more like Dropbox Paper or Confluence even, things that are more like rich text editing and more visual. So you have a formatting bar or a block editor of some kind or something there. We're still defining this vision of what the end result will look like, but the goal is to provide a more visual, more familiar, more responsive, and less, we'll just say an editing flow that requires fewer steps. And ideally one that doesn't require any knowledge of terminal commands or even like a Git flow in general. We are excited because we've just shipped today, actually. We finally merged our first feature. The team's been working hard this past release, and we are officially in the GitLab product. We started with a template for middlemen so that we can dog food our own feature in the coming milestones. And right now, our MVC, our first MVC, will put a persistent edit button on all the pages that support editing. So if you were looking at, we'll take the handbook for example, but I want to caveat that we haven't integrated into the handbook. But the use case we're trying to get to is if you're looking at the handbook, right now on the bottom of every page we have in the footer, like open this in web IDE. Imagine a link that just says open in static site editor or edit this page in static site editor. Or it could just be an icon. Whatever it says, the trigger is on the page, persistent, and when you click that, instead of going to the web IDE, you're going to go into our static site editor, and that is going to just pull in the content from that page and let you edit it directly, and then click one button to create a branch, commit your changes to that branch, and generate a merge request. We hope that that's going to be, awesome. Yeah, it sounds pretty good. Right now, it's pretty it works, and it doesn't work on the handbook, but it works on our template project. Our next milestone is going to be focused on adding the what you see is what you get, the rich text styling interface on top of the editor. And then we're going to be working on a couple other small things most likely before we integrate it with the handbook. But my guess is we're like, I haven't cleared this with Derek and the team, but my guess is we're probably 2 to 3 milestones away from getting this integrated in the handbook. And that will be the real test. That's where we're going to start to be able to get real feedback from everyone at GitLab and those outside that want to contribute to the handbook, and see how we can continue to iterate on our editing workflow. So I say all that, and that is our main focus as a group. But we do maintain the handbook as well, technically speaking. And while we don't technically own the visual of the handbook, the UI and UX, I think, in the spirit of GitLab, everybody can contribute. We have made changes to the UX, and we'll continue to make changes to improve the reading and editing experience. Some of those examples on our roadmap are making sure that we expose a little more of the sort of meta information about a handbook page, like assigning maybe similar to how we have code owners in the code base, but like a primary DRI for the page content. If you needed to request a review, that's who you should assign it to. Exposing information about the last time it was updated and edited, and by whom. And then things like making, we just shipped that tooltip. So as you highlight text now in the handbook, you can click an icon and it'll jump you right into the web IDE. We want to continue to expand on that and be able to link you not just to the web IDE, but put the cursor in the web IDE exactly in the point, or as close as we can get to where your selection was. Imagine a long page. I know Sales Enablement has a bunch of long pages. If you selected text and you click edit, we want to take you into the web IDE and into the paragraph, at least, to the general area where you need to be editing.
I'm curious to the team. Has anybody used that feature? I know I have. I like it. Anybody used it?
Yeah,
it's great to hear.
Noticed that the other day, and it's pretty awesome.
Can we do a screen share just to show it real quick?
Yeah.
Do you want me to share screen, or do you want to drive it?
I got it. Let me just do the handbook page up. Share my screen.
Yeah, especially helpful, like you said, those long pages, because instead of having to scroll down, just having it right there is nice.
So here's our handbook direction page. So this is very topical. So previously you'd have to scroll down, and this isn't a very long page, but you'd have to scroll all the way down and click Web IDE. Now, if I found something I wanted to update, or a typo or something like that, I can say, here it is, and it didn't pop up. We're in because this is a direction page. It's only in handbook. Take a better example. We started small in the spirit of everything iteration and MVCs. We didn't include the direction pages because they're dynamically generated. And handbook pages are a little more one-to-one with Markdown. So inside the handbook domain, we can say if we wanted to change this. Now, we added a social sharing because there's, there's some times where you want to talk about GitLab on Twitter, so you can select text and copy that text into a tweet. But we had always intended to also make this a utility for editing. So these two icons, one takes you to the file view, and the other takes you directly into the web IDE. And so I can go and edit now. In this case, the product handbook page is quite long, and so it'd be great if we can jump right to that line of code that I had selected and maybe put your cursor there so you can start editing. That'll probably be one of our next iterations on that little feature. We also have a bunch of pipeline improvements in progress. We're we're directly responsible for the handbook's build times, and we want to make that as quick as possible, given the constraints of the technologies that we've chosen. So Middleman has notoriously long pipeline, or build times given projects of a certain size, and we are pushing the limits of what Middleman was really intended to do. We're looking at an alternate project that we could migrate to called Frontend that should hopefully dramatically speed up our build times. But until then, we're focused on a lot of other improvements, and some of them are closed out already, some of them are in flight, and we're working on making sure that when you click build, when you finally get the merge request in the pipeline, it doesn't take 35-45 minutes like it used to. And I think we've got it down on average to 15 minutes, and I'd like to see it under 10, but realistically a 5-minute mark would be really nice.
And I think they can come up with more inclusive names than middleman and frontman.
I think they could, yeah.
Front person.
Yep, I totally agree. So I think, yeah, so we have sort of a dual focus in that we want to maintain the handbook. We want to improve the performance of the handbook and add features that make the handbook easier to use. At the same time, we're looking at revamping the entire editing experience through our primary feature, and then eventually dogfooding that. So at a certain point, these concerns will converge, I think, and we'll have a static site editor that's feature rich enough that we can start building on that instead of building UX features on the handbook itself. And we could be looking at an editor that actually allows you to import reusable content and have a media library that you can import assets into your page, and maybe even a block editor to rearrange content and things like that. That's a little bit down the road, but we're headed in the direction where editing a page in the handbook should really never have to go into our code base directly.
So team, what would you like to learn more about for a site editor, for the handbook? What questions have you been dying to ask? Now you got Derek and Eric here.
One for me is, once you've made a merge request, can you go back and then double check what you've done the merge request on while it's in process, or do you have to wait till it actually posts? So that's because you're always second guessing yourself. Like maybe I should have changed that. Can you go back into that iteration that is basically in process and modify it or double check it? So I just.
Yes, you can. So I'm gonna screen share again. Now this is let's see, this is a merge request here. I think did I stop? What am I sharing? I'm not sharing the right window. Let me see.
I want to mention, I'm going to jump in and mention one thing too is, though this isn't set in stone, it's very likely that we will not, present any Git terminology related terms, essentially. Like you just mentioned, Eric, merge request, that might be something you don't need to know, and it was just a submission, a version of your content or something like that, right? So we'll probably very likely abstract that terminology to make it more friendly and more common, I guess.
Okay.
That's again one of the
simplified user interface experience. Gotcha.
Exactly right.
Yeah. The other thing I'll point out related to this previewing is our end goal right now, where we think we want to get, is that you're editing the content in an environment that feels like you're still on the page. You're not in a text editor, that you can actually be previewing it as you type, or at least as close to real time as possible. For technical reasons, there may always still need to be a preview button, but we're hoping that we can get that preview in the context of the editor and not in the context of the merge request, so that you can be confident about your change before you click submit. And once you click submit, you can actually just back away, and assuming you have somebody else on the other side that's like monitoring merge requests or monitoring pipelines, you as a content contributor would never have to worry about it again.
Okay.
Right now, though, once you create a merge request, you will get a pipeline that runs, and that's what's going on. The middleman project is running, and it's generating the new files necessary, and then eventually it'll start a review app. And in this little block here, you can click View App. You have to wait for this to run. This is where it takes an uncomfortably long time sometimes. But once you get the merge request through the pipeline, you can click View App, and that will spin up a site that's actually, you know, a preview of your changes that's not live. So it's like a containerized environment, and then you can go in and confirm your changes before you merge.
Okay, because my concern is I did a merge request 2 weeks ago, and I did the preview and it looked fine. And then when I posted it, it was jacked up. So I had to go back in. So yeah, the preview didn't reflect what went live. And I figured out it was some formatting issues, but when I did a preview, it didn't show any of those formatting issues. It looked good to go. So that was one of my concerns. And then I'm always second guessing myself now.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to be able to rely on the review app. I don't have a good sense of why that would have been. The review apps are maintained by another team, but it should be the same.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth pointing out two things there. Like, what's interesting, like trying to be zoomed out here, why a pipeline doesn't even need to run in a way. Like, you're just like, you know, that's just kind of the process. Again, that's where the Git is behind the scenes. That still needs to be done, and we can all understand that in the sense of that's how there's visibility into change tracking, right? Like that's basically what that's all about. But otherwise, that doesn't matter. Like, assumingly, you're just trying to change some text. Like, that's probably the majority of the time. That could be wrong. We're just trying to change some content. So realistically, you don't even need to know you're in an editor. You could just be changing the text. Like, this is what I personally see, and I don't think it's too wild to really envision. There's just technical things behind the scenes that we need to help facilitate the Git behind the scenes. But otherwise, you can just start changing the text, but it just doesn't get saved. So that's the piece where we need to. That's where the magic needs to happen. Okay. But is it fair to? I guess my question is it fair to assume that the majority? Two things. Is it fair to assume the majority of your edits are text-based? And then two, is it usually something that's just a small amount, like you just are changing some text on a single page?
It's probably now mostly text, but I think as we're learning more, we're going to go more graphic and more visual. Sure. So probably 70% text, maybe 30% visual. Okay. And then we tend to do larger, bigger docs. Sometimes it's a one small page update, but then John and I tend to do bigger projects. And my other teammate, bigger, longer form documents. So we both kind of do long form.
Cool. Yeah, because the more, if we were to get to some kind of 80-20 or something like that, that can also inform which way we lean on what are the defaults of that editor, for example. So yeah, for what it's worth, that's useful.
Okay.
I think some of the challenges too, and Eric Brown, tell me if you agree, but it's observations we've run into challenge where some Markdown converters like work and others like cause it to go haywire.
Yeah.
So that's the weird thing. Yeah, it's like sometimes those converters are fine, and then sometimes it's just a mess.
Yeah, because I use the Google Markdown.
Kind of the worst. Markdown's both the best thing that has ever happened and the worst. It's very basic. It's great, and it's very quick to write. But given all the differences across different flavors of Markdown, as they call them, different extensions of Markdown, it's very hard to stay consistent. And so that's what I think we're hoping to do with our editor as well, is like we'll pull in the Markdown and we'll give you that rich preview. You don't need to worry about what your syntax is. Like if you click table, it's going to make a table, and don't worry about how it's formatted and where your pipes are and how many spaces there are and whether or not you need a header or not. Like we'll handle that because we know the requirements on the back end, and all you have to worry about is what's in the table cells, and then click merge.
That's exciting. I know we're over time. Eric and Derek, thank you very much for taking the time. I've got one more question for you, but I want to say, hey, congrats on the first feature that you've released. That's awesome.
Yeah,
My last question for you is, so as folks want to learn more, I did put the handbook page in the doc, but if folks have questions about the handbook, should they go to the handbook Slack channel, or where would you direct folks if they'd like to learn more, if they've got questions?
Yeah, the handbook Slack channel is a great place if you've got questions. If there's an urgent escalation, if something's broken, we have handbook escalation. There's a process there where we're monitoring it within a reasonable, SLA. We get back to you. And but most of the time, if you have general questions about how something should work or how something should be formatted, the handbook Slack channel is a great place. That's also where we'll be, we'll post information about improvements, and we'll make an announcement when the static site editor is available to be used on the handbook as well. That might warrant a company-wide announcement, but we'll be sure to look for it in the handbook as well.
Awesome.
I just want to add one thing too. If any of you run into some kind of problem or just have an idea of it'd be so much easier if I could do X, please also share that in the handbook channel. Or create an issue, whatever makes the most sense for you, but just get it written down in some form, and feel free to @ me personally or whatever you need to do, because there are a lot of things we can do. We just need to know, we need to try to find what's going to be the best set of defaults, essentially. Because that's basically it.
Very good. Hey, we appreciate all you do. Thanks again for taking the time today.
Of course.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.